Alrighty, hey y'all, I'm doing my introduction podcast for Childhood Under Siege by Joel Bakken. And in a big red circle, which I'm presuming this is like the other title for the book, is How Big Business Targets Your Children. Now, I was actually really interested when I first picked up this book because I've always had a interesting in marketing and economics and advertisements. And, I this book makes sense to me in the context, excuse me, I've always thought of something like big business targeting children in the sense of old cigarette ads, or like, yeah, Joe Camel, for Camel cigarettes or things like that would, they would target kids, say an unhealthy activity is cool. I didn't really think about it in the context of everything targeting our kids that everything from cereal to toys to clothes, all of that targets kids. And pretty, in a first world society or Western society such as the United States or countries in Europe, kids are under constant bombardment from advertisements, arguably more so than they have ever been in recorded human history. So I think this book is a very that's kind of why this book caught my eye, is how, I have noticed that I, as a child, was influenced by advertisements, and how with the opening of the digital marketplace through tablets and phones and things like that kids get increasingly younger ages, more and more opportunities are being opened up for companies to advertise to kids. So this book came out in 2012. So it was kind of getting in on that. Like, I had an iPad 2 in 2012. So it was, iPhones had been out for a while, but they were still relatively like, I wouldn't say that I was raised on a tablet, I don't think the book came out when that was necessarily a thing yet. But I'm about a chapter into the book so far, and I really liked it because it opens with like the author, Joel Bakken, as a kid, him, saying, oh, I threw rocks at cars, I did all of that, I was a stereotypical kid. But he had a line that I'm going to summarize that I really, really liked, which was after he snuck out to go to like a dance hall at a hotel or something, and he was finally, he's dancing with a girl, he's like, oh my gosh, I'm doing it, his dad and his uncle come in with big mounted headlights because he snuck out of a cabin in the woods, and they, of course, panicked and went out looking for him. And Bakken says that, in the moment he was humiliated and angry, because that's, parents, they regulate rules, they do this, they do that, they just cramp my style. But he said something that, even I agree with, that as much as we may strain under, adults doing things, it's nice, we still want them to parent. Like, if my mom just stopped caring, about how late I stayed up or what I ate or what I did, I'd feel a little neglected, even if now I think sometimes she does that a little too much, it's the idea that they care that makes, that is reassuring. Now, after that prologue, he actually gives us a little historical context. He kind of describes how children, for a very, very, very long time, were kind of expendable because most of them didn't even make it to adulthood. Oh, Timmy fell down the well, but that's fine. We have 7 other kids to compensate. And not only did they rarely make it to adulthood, education was not a priority. Kids were workforces. A family farm would have 7 or 8 kids, not just because they love raising children, but because 7 or 8 kids, that's a long-term investment that eventually, 2 or 3 of them will stick around to watch the farm. You're doubling or tripling your workforce. And that's how it was for an incredibly long time until what Joel Bakken describes, he describes the 20th century as the century of the child. And he says, through a combination of just changing points of views with, increasing urbanization or passing of child labor laws, our view of children in societies changed substantially. They were viewed as, little people, you had to enforce their rights. You had to help develop them and help them nurture and grow. And this carried on for a very long time in the 20th century until Joel Bakan actually ties the rise of advertisements' effects on our children to the rise of the new right and neoliberalism, which I thought was a very interesting comparison. He described the increasing prevalence of figures like Ronald Reagan or Margaret Thatcher and their deregulation and decentralization of the economy, and giving more companies free reins through things like tax cuts. That stymied not only a lot of progressive movements through, the way of, you can't have, your kid's not going to be able to go to pre-K because we are cutting Head Start programs, we're cutting education, we're doing yada, yada, yada. But also in ways that, are, maybe less direct. Like, I don't think Ronald Reagan necessarily wrote on a piece of paper, I want this to happen. But there's a quote that Joel Bakan put in his book that I find very, very interesting. And it says the following. Traditionally, governments restrained corporations, understanding that their purely self-interested institutional characters denied them the ability to restrain themselves. Legal limits were imposed in the forms of regulations, and agencies were created to enforce those regulations. Such measures were believed necessary to protect children's health and well-being, among other important public interests. That was a key belief behind Century of the Child reforms. Over the last 30 years, however, governments under the spell of neoliberalism steadily retreated from that belief and from regulatory practices it inspired. Children were left unprotected as a result and are now openly exposed to corporate predation and harm. Parents, by corollary, have become less able to protect children. Their parenting choices limited and frustrated by corporations' profit-seeking maneuvers. Parents may choose, for example, to feed their children healthy food, but they have no choice about the powerful and pervasive marketing that fuels children's desires for consumption of unhealthy food. They may choose to buy non-toxic products for their children, but they have no choice about the many other sources through which children are exposed to industrial chemicals. They may choose to limit their children's viewing of media violence, but they have no choice about the increasing ubiquity and brutality of such violence in children's lives. I think that's a very, very important paragraph because it's just kind of explaining the, knock on wood effect of neoliberalism in the sense that such deregulation just allows for more exposure due to the fact that corporations don't have to necessarily, they're not regulated. They can advertise more. They have more money to spend, more capital to invest. In that, as I mentioned earlier, I thought of the rise of neoliberalism in the sense that, it would cut movements for education or things like that. But I didn't even think about it in this way that Joel Bakan put it. And I found that incredibly interesting. So overall, pretty good book so far. I'm only about 25 pages in. But it's very interesting. I like that he used he gave me historical context because I'm a sucker for history. You can, if you were to, the historical context of this book is like the equivalent of Elmer Fudd putting like a carrot out for Bugs Bunny to lure him out of his rabbit hole. You can get me to read just about anything. With a little bit of history thrown in. So overall, I like it a lot, and I'm going to just keep reading and see what this book has to tell me. So yeah, that's all for today. Thank you.